Welcome to today's lesson on definition of congruence in terms of rigid motion. Congruence. Figures are congruent when their corresponding sides are congruent and their corresponding angles are congruent. So, for example, in the case of the two triangles drawn, they are congruent because their corresponding sides are congruent and because their corresponding angles are congruent. So, one tick means those two sides are congruent, two ticks means those two sides are congruent, and three ticks means that those two sides are congruent. One arc means that those two angles are congruent. Two arcs means that those two angles are congruent, and three arcs means that those two angles are congruent. Rigid motion transformations. Rigid motion transformations are transformations that preserve the size and shape of a figure, meaning that the size and the shape stays the same. The figure is preserved, the pre-image and image are congruent to each other. The rigid motion transformations include translations, rotations, and reflections. So let's take a look at an example of a translation. So what a translation is when a geometric figure either slides down or up or to the right, or in a combination of the two to make a diagonal transformation. So let's say, for instance, triangle A, B, C is translated to the right, forming triangle A prime, B prime, and C prime. Now, because this is a rigid motion transformation, we know that A is congruent to A prime, B is congruent to B prime, C is congruent to C prime. AB is congruent to A prime, B prime, BC is congruent to B prime, C prime, and AC is congruent to A prime, C prime. Next, a rotation. So another name for a rotation is a turn. And so we start out with the pre-image ABC, and we're going to rotate this pre-image to form the image A prime, B prime, and C prime. And so after this rotation, because the size and shape of these two triangles are preserved, we know that A is congruent to A prime, B is congruent to B prime, and C is congruent to C prime. A reflection. A reflection is when a shape flips across a line. And that line could be the y-axis or the x-axis. And so let's say that triangle ABC reflects across the x-axis, now forming the image A prime, B prime, C prime. And now because reflections are rigid motion transformations, we know that triangle ABC is going to be congruent to triangle A prime, B prime, C prime. And that concludes our lesson on the definition of congruence in terms of rigid motion.